The customer is fed up with this Toyota. It will not start whenever it's cold out. Let's find out what's wrong with this thing. Let's get started. We always mention here at the shop, and various shops I've worked at, something my mentor always told me: whenever you get one job in, it always comes in threes. If a bad clutch comes in, you can expect two more. It's really strange. It always has worked out that way. But this month, we're dealing in 6s and 9s and 12s. There's a lot of Toyotas coming in. They're from all over the country. They're not just in one area. And none of the problems are the same. It just happens to be that there's a lot of them all at once. Our schedule actually shows this week Toyota, 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 Toyota. It's really weird. But we need to find out what's wrong with these cars. That's why they're here. And we're going to find out today. It may not be very good news on this car. Now, the customer does state on this 2009 Toyota Corolla S, the 1.8, when it's cold out, it just won't start. But when it's a little warmer out, if they can get it to kick over and get it to start, it'll stay running as long as the engine's warm enough. It just barely starts. And even when it's running, it doesn't run very well, it doesn't idle very well. Let's take a look around this thing. There are millions of these Corollas on the road. You can see this in your rearview mirror quite consistently no matter what city you live in. There's so many of these. This is the S model, as you can see. It was shown in the grill. It's actually in decent shape. It's dirty because we're dealing with winter weather here in Kansas lately. It's a dark gray color. The wheels are decent. Tires are decent. As you come around to the back, again, it says Corolla. It is the S model. It does have some scrapes and things here on the bumper. It doesn't appear to have any major damage or anything. I do see something, guys. Here it is. There's some rust right there in the wheel arch. It's not terrible, but it's definitely there. So before we get too deep into it, let's let Mrs. Wizard show you guys in the interior. I really like the interior on these because it's simple and it's basic. Take it away, Mrs. Wizard.
No, I do promise that this is a Toyota and not a BMW with all those lights blinking and flashing. They're just saying, hey, yo, I never get to work because, well, I'm a Toyota. It does say it has 156,248 miles. Not a whole lot for a Toyota product, especially of this age. As we move back, get closer. Again, everything with Toyota is easy to use, easy to see, very simplistic. The dash is in good shape. There's no cracks. There's nothing going on. As we move down, lots of gray, and, well, a little bit more gray. HVAC system, again, as Wizard said, is very simple to use. That's one of the nice features of Toyota. They don't overcomplicate everything. Gear selector does show a little bit of dirt and wear on it, but that's probably because we've been scraping a lot of windshields and cleaning a lot of snow off of our car, and tends to make things a little bit dirtier. We do have cloth seats with a fun pattern in the center. You can kind of see in the center section there that it has some kind of a circular accents, which is kind of interesting and nice. Door card, well, as I said, gray, and gray. Well, that's what you got a whole lot more of over there. It's in good shape. There's nothing broken, nothing missing. In the back seat, they do have a few personal items in here. We do have a steering wheel cover and a pillow and a blanket bundled together. I guess that's a good thing to do and have in your car during the winter, especially because we are forecast to have a polar vortex coming through in the next day or so. Yikes. As opposed to the last Toyota I talked to you about, a Toyota Avalon, this Toyota Corolla does have its steering wheel still in place. So as Wizard said, they all have different problems, and this one has a doozy of a problem as well. Let's get under the hood and see what's going on.
Before we get too far into the engine bay, you guys know what's wrong with the car now. Let's play the game. You can let me know in the comments what you think is wrong. I'll list 3 things that could be wrong with this car that's causing it to absolutely not start when the weather is really cold out. Is it A, an engine coolant temperature sensor? Is it B, bad gasoline? Or is it C, a bad mass airflow sensor? So let us know in the comments what you think it is. Now we're going to go through all the test procedures and things we went through to figure out what's wrong with this car. And again, Jared from the Questionable Garage came to the rescue on this one. He confirmed our biggest fears. But let's find out what we went through to get to this point. So before we go into any kind of test equipment or any other procedures, the first thing we want to do is scan for codes. And this is really weird what we found. But let's go ahead and get the scan tool hooked up and see what it shows us. All right, here we go. Trouble codes, nothing. It's happy. There is nothing wrong as far as the engine computer is concerned. We also checked that when the car first arrived, when it was cold outside, and it was the same scenario. No codes. There's nothing to go off of. So we got it into the shop, and even sitting in here for a while, it just would not start. It's crank and crank, 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 crank. And I was smelling fuel pretty strong. So I told Junior Man, I said, pull the plugs on this thing. Let's see what's going on. Maybe this got some fouled plugs or something's wrong or a bad coil. I don't know. Pull the plugs. And here's a couple of them here. They are just soaked in gas. You can smell it. Very, very heavily soaked in gas. So this thing was flooding pretty hard. So I got to think, okay, what could be the scenario here? I've been through this before with other cars and have found that someone got gas at a gas station and half of the gasoline was water, or way too much ethanol, an E85 or something like that, and it just wouldn't start. So I've got a little bit of gasoline out of this fuel tank on this car. I'm going to show you a method that I use to kind of see what's going on. Let me grab the bottle. So here I have some gasoline removed from the vehicle. It just looks like clear, nice gasoline, nothing wrong with it. Luckily, I don't see a bunch of water in the bottom. I've seen that before. I've actually, for a customer, we drained a bunch of the fuel into a bottle like this, and after about 2 minutes of setting, it was half water. This one's been sitting for a little while. It's crystal clear. So I know it's not water in the fuel, but what if the ethanol is too high? How do we know if this is an E85 or E30 or E10 or E20 or E0? We use water. So I currently have a black line right here. This is how much fuel I have in here. I'm going to fill it up with water and mark the line there. So I'll go ahead and get some water put in. So as we know, fuel or oil doesn't mix with water. So I'm going to go ahead and mark right here is where the water line is. Okay. I'm going to shake it up. And now we let it set for about 10 minutes. If the water line raises way higher up to here, we know we got tons of alcohol or ethanol in this. If it doesn't change, then you just have plain gas, there's no ethanol. So let's let it set. So while this sits here, and we'll let it sit for about 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll check the alcohol content here in a little bit. But I knew it was getting too much gas, or it seemed like it was getting too much gas. I used the scan tool to manually go in there and shut off the fuel. I just turned off the fuel completely. Then I did a flood clear, which is wide open throttle, and I got it to actually start. And while it was running, I real quick turned on the fuel again, and it would run. But it was running really choppy and really rough. But while it was running, I checked all the data. The engine coolant temperature was where it should be. It was like 90 degrees or something, because it started to warm up. The shop's about 65 in here. And then I checked the intake air temperature sensor. It said it was about 71 degrees. That checks out. I checked out airflow with the mass airflow sensor. It was about 2.2 grams per second, and on a 1.8 liter, that's about perfect. So it's got a good reading there. I checked the oxygen sensors, the air-fuel ratio sensor. All that was within line where it should be, but it was constantly pulling fuel. What I mean by that is the short-term and the long-term fuel trims were like minus 20. It was trying to draw back fuel, say, whoa, there's way too much fuel here. It's something's wrong. But I ruled out that it's any kind of temperature sensor or airflow sensor or air ratio sensor, anything like that. Everything was reading like it should be. Why was it acting up? So let's let this little bottle set for 5 more minutes. It's already been 5 already, roughly, and we'll see what we see on the alcohol mixture. All right, So 10 minutes have passed. Let's take a look at where we're at. Exactly where it was 10 minutes ago. So our fuel has no alcohol or ethanol in it. It had no water in it before I did this test. So the fuel is good. This fuel test I just did is very easy, very low tech. It doesn't take any special tools. And you can tell a lot about the fuel. I did take a tiny bit of it just to make sure it lights properly and it lights off like it should. There's nothing wrong with the gasoline that's in this vehicle. It still won't start when it's super cold. So was it an engine coolant temperature sensor? No, it actually has a good reading. It's a proper reading. It's not some skewed reading like -80. I've seen that before. It's actually matched where it should be. Was it a mass airflow sensor? No, the readings from that are actually fine as well. Everything it's doing is what it's supposed to do. Could have been an oxygen sensor, or air-fuel ratio sensor. No, those are actually reading pretty well where they should be as well. So it wasn't any of those three scenarios that causing this issue. We really had to dig deep into this one to figure out what it is. So I went to Identifix and typed in cold start, no start, only when cold. I'll go grab my paperwork and show you what we found. You can see a lot of these. It says some of them jump time, lost compression on all cylinders, replace the engine, I mean, there's just pages of replace the engine. Replace the whole engine? It seemed like, I mean, it ran rough, but it kind of ran okay when I did get it to run. But just when it's cold, it just won't start. Replace the engine? It's like, well, that's not going to be cheap. It's probably going to cost as much as this whole car is worth. I said, hold on a minute here. Before I start jumping to conclusions, I need to verify this with someone who's just only worked on Toyotas for a long time. And that was Jared from the Questionable Garage. He said, oh, Car Wizard, that's easy. It's low compression. I said, yeah, well, that's what I'm reading on Identifix. It says a lot of people replace the whole engine. He said, yeah, sadly, what happens is this is the bad years of Toyota where they had low tension piston rings. And as long as you kept the oil changes up and did everything properly, they're okay. But if you go really long on your oil changes, it starts to carbon up the rings and you lose compression. It just wears the rings out and they're shot. Now it could be skip time or timing chain or something like that. I did look at that data on the scan tool and everything lines up where it's supposed to be. It hasn't jumped time. So I talked with Jared some more. I was like, well, okay, it's low compression. I get that when it's cold. It just can't get enough pressure. How is that making it flood? He said, do a compression test, Wizard, and get back with me. That's what we're going to do right now together. We're going to do a compression test on a couple of cylinders. Jared tells me 145 is the minimum. When they start going below that, he says they don't run good. They won't start in cold weather. It should be 150, 60, 70, maybe even 180. 145 is really the bottom of where it should be. Let's see what we get. Well, about 98, just barely under 100. That's way below the minimum. Let's try one more, just for posterity. Let's try one more cylinder. It really had to try hard, but it got to 95. 95, maybe 100 across all 4 cylinders. It's not a blown head gasket. There are some common issues where number 2 and 3 or whatever can have a low compression on those 2, but it's all of the cylinders. I sent that information to Jared. He's like, there you go. You don't need to search anymore. You don't need to look up anything else. He said, it's time for a new engine. There is no way around it. There's no question about it. And he says at the dealership, when we would have to replace these, it was usually $8 to $9 grand. The engine being 6 or 7. So you can buy another one of these cars for that much money. It's really not worth fixing. We're going to call the customer here in a little bit with the bad news. Really, really sucks. Obviously, I'm not going to charge them anything. Whenever I have catastrophic news like this, I don't usually charge the customer. I just can't do it. But it makes sense. Think about it. When it's really cold out, it's probably even in the 80s as far as the PSI. It just can't get the pressure up there. Even if you can get it running, it's almost not enough PSI to stay running, and the engine's dumping the fuel in and the air trying to keep the RPMs up. There's the flooding. And when it's cold out, it won't start. You're cranking, 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 cranking. It's not lighting because the compression's not getting high enough. It just keeps adding more fuel and more fuel, and it floods it. One of the best things I've learned as a shop owner is to have people who are friends or in the field who are hyper specific in certain brands. Have a guy who does Toyotas or Hondas, and that's all they did for years. Because you can message them and say, you know, what about this or what about that? They'll tell you right where to go. And vice versa, when they need help with something. I've even had Cameron from DC Motorworks message me about a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. He's like, constantly we bounce ideas off of each other's heads, and we work together. We're friends. We help each other out, and it really, really saves a lot of time in the shop. So now we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, this engine is a goner. I don't need to run any more tests. It's going to be bad news for the customer. We'll see what they want to do. I don't recommend putting another engine in because you can go buy a whole other car for the same money. Unfortunately, with a car, when you buy one, especially a used one, there's no magical black box that gives you the service history. If there's no recorded history like on paper or with computers as far as typing it in and recording the history yourself or a dealership, you don't really know what you're getting into. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, Toyota was known for these in the mid-2000s to 2010. Somewhere around in there, they had low tension piston rings, and this could happen. Now it's time to call the customer. What a bummer. But definitely want to do a video for you guys, kind of some steps you can do if you have a similar situation, how you can get some data together. Remember, we don't do the parts gun. We get the data together. Then we make an informed decision on where we go from there. If you're curious what kind of tools we're probably not going to use on this car, but we do use in the rest of the cars in the shop, check our Amazon affiliates link in the description below. A lot of the tools we use in the shop are listed for sale there, and if you purchase anything, we get a small cut and really appreciate it. Make sure to hit the subscribe button because there's so many more cool videos to come just for you guys. Thanks for watching.